just before we get started. The mug, the colour, the amount of tea in this might change throughout the video. And it's not because I've got jump cuts or I'm shooting it over multiple days, it's just because I'm a tea wizard. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to use this camera on holidays. What's the problem? It needs film. It's a film camera. So, here's the film chamber. And, luckily, it came with this little film canister. It's a fairly simple construction. Just a couple of parts. We simply put the film on this spool, roll it on this side, fit it between these light traps here, which are really tight, and one of the pieces of felt has actually fallen out, and I think it's causing scratches, but we'll get to that later. We close it up, and then we simply put it in there. All pretty easy. So what's the problem? Well, Mamiya hasn't made these kinds of film packs for, I don't know, 50 years, something like that. Maybe a little less, not sure. So we have to fill it with something. And you may have been thinking you were silly, you should have went for 110 film. Well, I kind of like the idea of using 16mm film. I have a theory that it's probably going to outlast the current resurgence of 110. I hope I'm wrong. I kind of like the idea of 110 cameras coming back. Otherwise, why would I be using this thing? But I think the option to be able to slice other films and just load it into the canister or get cine film is really cool. And so we're going to see about, can we actually slice some film into smaller segments and then load it into this camera. The reason for that is we have a lot more options than if we just, go with cine film. At the moment, there's only a couple of options of cine film. I think there's Orwo's UN54, and then there's a couple of Kodak options, and that's about it. Oh wait, no, there's also FOMA, but yeah, the point stands, there's only a couple. Plus, I really like using some of the Kentmere films, and it would be really cool to use it in this camera while I'm on holiday. So to use the film, we need to slice it. Just for reference, this is what 16mm film looks like. Thankfully, we don't need these sprocket holes. In some 110 cameras, they really require sprocket holes, which are not this distance or spacing. Thankfully, in this case, we don't need the sprocket holes. I think there are a couple of 110 cameras that do need sprocket holes. I don't think this is the right spacing for them, but in this case, we don't need it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some wood or plastic or something, and we're going to make it into a couple of different sections, and we're going to put razor blades in between those sections to cut the film into, I think, 3 slices of 16mm and a remainder of about 12.5. So we pop a roll of 120 here, we pull it through, and out the other side we get cut film. That's the idea. Now, there are a couple of places online where you can buy something like this. They were really expensive to actually get shipped here and could take a really long time, so I figure I'll give this a go and see what it comes out like. Okay, now, like any great project, we're going to need some materials. First, some cardboard, pretending to be wood, a saw, some nails because they were lying around my house, wood glue because apparently woodworkers can't make anything without this stuff, and razor blades for cutting the film.
And my mitts. So
I've drawn up, measured, and I'm just going to cut through this absolutely terrible MDF wood substitute. It's all I had on hand, and it's going to be a lot easier to cut through than actual wood, which I don't have anyway. And later when you see what I've got to drill holes, it'll kind of make a lot of sense why this is what I ended up using. Sand off the edges. Don't want any splinters. And now we're just going to arrange it in the rough shape of what we want. We're going to mark out where we're going to put some holes to hold this whole thing together. Just don't mind me cutting myself. It's fine. Nothing to worry about. So at this point I have run out of the capability of what my tools can do, and so like any Australian, I am heading to Bunnings. What kinds of things will I get? I mean, there's some awesome saws. These would be really helpful. Maybe a couple of knives. Actual work holding? Madness. A real rotary tool with some actual bits. A drill. Maybe a drill. That could be useful. But I will pick up some screws. That's non-negotiable. I decided against the nails. It's just going to fracture everything as I try to build it. And some washers for spacing. This is the crap I ended up with. So I take my finest Trojan nipple clamps and I start putting everything together, figuring out the spacing, marking out the holes, and maybe I should have bought a drill. As the project goes on, this thing frustrates me more and more. It's the cheapest 12-volt rotary tool that I could buy, and I bought it many years ago. I do actually have a drill, but it's about 100 kilometers south of where I currently am, so I'm just gonna keep on going with this thing. It wasn't painful at all. Now the whole time I keep on putting this thing back together and apart and making sure the whole thing fits and works together. And it gives me reasonable results, but as you'll see later, it doesn't quite fit even though I'm taking all these precautions. And I know a master craftsman never blames his tools, but in this case, these tools, they were horrible. So as you can see here, I also added a 12mm slot. So in theory, when we stack all of these layers up, we'll have 12 plus 16, 16, 16, and that should be the full width of our 120 film. So, fingers crossed, I'm going to put this together and the whole thing's going to work. Now the one saving grace is I do have this little electric screwdriver, and it's like the one thing that actually worked properly. So after taking a very careful look at it, I think these holes here for the screw heads aren't quite deep enough. And perhaps with the addition of the washers, they're just getting everything out of alignment. So I'm going to go and bore those out a bit more. So after fiddling and boring, I figured that this one here is actually just out of alignment. And there's not a lot I can do about it at this stage other than perhaps bore out an enormous hole here. So for the moment, I think we're just going to leave this one alone. We're going to try and get the rest of them in and see how we go. So, mistakes were made, but we'll continue anyway. The general theory of operation is that we're going to pass some film in through here. At each layer, it's going to get cut, and so we should get 3 sections of 16mm film and 1 of 12.5. This has got to be done in a dark bag, and even if it's successful, I won't be able to show you off the individual pieces because they're all light sensitive. Let's give it a go. Are we going to sacrifice a beautiful roll of Kentmere 100 pan to the gods? Now even this bit's going to be tricky. I'm going to need to feed this through. Thankfully, I can do that in the light. But to make things easier, I think what I'm going to do is actually pre-cut it. And I think we're cutting. They're definitely cutting. We're at the arrow. We're gonna have to go in the dark bag. But before I do that, let's see. Let's grab another spool and let's see if we can spool it up. Alright, let's chuck it in the dark bag and see how we go. It was cutting, and then it tore. So we have very little film left, very little backing paper I should say, until we hit the film. I am not confident that we can pull it through. So at this point I had to come up with a solution because it was clear that this cutter wasn't going to work for me, and my holiday's actually creeping up closer and closer. So with that in mind, I thought long and hard about what my next step would be. Yeah, just buy some Kodak 7222. It's pre-cut. It may not be the film I really wanted to go with because of dynamic range issues, but look, at this point it's quick, it's not terribly expensive considering how much of it you get, and it's going to be a lot nicer to work with at this point. So now we're just going to load it up on the one spool that I currently have. The only issue is I have to cut this into strips. They're 45 centimeters long, and that's about the width of my dock bag. So I was fortunate enough to go to a concert, and I used this single roll as a test to see if the camera was functioning and how we were going. And kind of worked. We got a heap of scratches on the film. But I did get this one nice photo, even though it is scratched. And this is the performer, Sleepy Benjamin. And even though it's scratched, it's kind of interesting. I don't mind it. It's not bad. So at this point, I'm going to talk about canisters, because the only canister that I have is the one that came with the camera. And these things haven't been made for a very, very long time. They're extremely hard to find on like eBay and things like that. There were some single-use canisters, obviously all of those are gone, and this is one of the reusable ones. And it's the best option in a lot of ways. It's made out of ABS plastic, it's quite thin, it does appear to be light tight, and obviously it's the right size for the camera. From reading some of the literature, I was under the impression that they also made a metal one, which would be really, really awesome. Went on eBay, lo and behold, there was a metal one. For those keen observers out there, you might have spotted the difference. The width between the reels is not correct. I don't know exactly what camera this is for. It might be for like a Minolta 16 or something like that. Not sure. But this here is kind of perfect and is what I would really love to use. So it's the same basic construction, except that it's made of all of these individual metal pieces. And all of these seem to be kind of formed from some kind of sheet metal. And it's great. This would be really, really robust and durable and the exact kind of thing I would love to use. But I can barely make a film slicer that doesn't work. So trying to build something like this is currently not available with the tools I have. In the future, this would be something I would love to make. But a little bit out of reach, so we're going to focus on the next best thing. What is within my power is begging a friend with a 3D printer to make me these. Now, somebody else designed them. I'll give credit where it's due. And the idea is great. They've actually done quite a lot of really nice design features. But being FDM 3D printed, these really are on the edge of the thickness we can get away with. They're very close to the limits. These are very, very tight. So if I just give it a quick demonstration. Very, very tight. Difficult to get in and way harder to get out. In fact, I'm just peeling up plastic as I do it. There's one other serious concern with these, and I think it just needs a little bit of redesign work to make it happen properly. And that is how we get the felt light traps in here. But this is all skipping ahead. Let's go back to me when I first got these 3D prints and trying to work through processing them. So here I've just got all the parts and I'm giving them a quick test to see if they fit together, and immediately we have a problem. The caps don't actually fit quite right, which is a problem and a bit strange because these were all printed at the same time. I'm just going to give the felt a quick test, and it doesn't really fit in there either. So I figure the best thing to do is actually a method called salt packing. It's where you get a container of salt that you powderize, just get like the cheap table salt, and like a coffee blender grinder thing, like the blade grinders, not like a proper coffee grinder, and you powderize a heap of salt. You put your 3D prints into the salt, and then you heat up your oven and you put them in there. And they will mostly stay dimensionally accurate, but they will shrink a tiny little bit. They'll also become stronger. So after that, I'm giving another test fit of these very salty parts, and it's still not working. I was hoping that they'll shrink a little bit and sort of the tolerances would come into the correct place. So now I'm going to try and modify them and see how we go. And it's just not working. Everything I try isn't working. That on top of the fact that like the felt won't stay in, or I don't have the right glue, and it's just become a horrifying mess at this point. So I am going to try like loading some film into these canisters without felt in the dark, and use that in the camera and see if we get scratching, if it can be used that way. Ideally, someone should send me a 3D printer, and then I'll redesign these and give it another crack and make ones that actually work properly. But until that happens, I'll just give it a test, and that's kind of where we have to leave it. Unfortunately, there is a sad note to this video. I've already been on my holiday and had a great time, and the Mamiya didn't come with me because I couldn't reliably put film in it. I did consider just taking like the one little canister that I know that works, that scratches the hell out of film, and reload it on the trip, but you know, the whole taking film through the x-ray scanners and the possibility of like an entire film reel being killed by that didn't sound appealing. It's a different thing if it's just like a couple of canisters of film versus the entire roll that I just bought. So in the end, I had to leave it. But that does not mean I'm giving up on this project. I am going to get this camera to work, and I'm going to get some kind of film canister system that happens, and I'm going to show you all the horrors that I did to make that work. But that won't be in the next part. In the next part, what we're going to explore is something that I've thought about for a long time, and that is, these negatives are tiny. How do we get the most image quality out of them?